We really appreciate that.
It's just, got some enthusiastic people here. This is Kathy and
Hi.
Deb Green and Sam Mitchum and Jack Horton and Susan. We are the ones that are teaming up and putting this together. And we're copying a format from New York, the Sawmill Audubon Society. Kathy found that online and enjoying it.
Now we have Karen from Southeast Texas. How exciting.
Oh, wow.
Nice.
You're seeing some migrants right now.
I bet.
Wow. Jack, can I ask you to screenshot the participants for us?
Okay.
Can you do that? All right. We will then get started in interest of making sure we hear all of Gina's talk. So everybody, please mute now. Let's see. And I just did it. I muted all. Okay. Quiet. Great. All right. So on this bird chat, we're going to first have some few announcements, and then mystery birds, then bird migration, new departures and arrivals, and then the program, Swallow-tailed Kites and Short-tailed Hawks with Gina Kent. And our next bird chat is next Thursday at 7 p.m. And the topic is chimney swifts. And we have Bruce Anderson and Jennifer Coleman from the Center for Haven for Injured and Orphaned Wildlife in Altamont Springs. She's a volunteer there and was able to release some chimney swifts recently that she reared. And this has stimulated this talk. The chimney swifts are going to be moving on south just about now. So that should be a good one too. And we have this Lake Apopka Wildlife Drive Ambassador Program for our wonderful Lake Apopka Wildlife Drive. Orange Audubon volunteers are out there giving out the maps and giving some tips to go through. And if you're local and you would like to join us, please email volunteer@orangeaudubonfl.org. All right, I'm going to turn this over to Jack with the mystery bird.
Oh, make sure I'm unmuted. Hi, everybody. The mystery bird, part of its name means wanderer. Some of them migrate over. They're very widely dispersed. If you have an idea of what it is, you could submit it in chat. They can be found in all sorts of terrain. So do we have a winner? Paula, peregrine falcon, yes. We can advance the screen. There we go. So briefly, I just want to talk about how they hunt. They're here, they've shown up. I saw one 2 Sundays ago, actually saw it very quickly, I mean, very closely and for a brief period of time. They search mostly from perches or while in the air. Their method of pursuit and attack, they will stoop, they'll dive down at a fast rate of speed, and they'll punch with their talons. I've watched them do this with common gallinudos, both on land and in the water. They'll bank around tight and punch again if need be, or they'll grab. Another method they have, which I have not witnessed here in Central Florida, is called ringing up. And they will either get above their intended target and they will stoop down shallow, come up, swoop down shallow, come up, and keep getting their target to fly faster and faster and faster until it's exhausted, and then they'll go in and grab it. And another method of ringing up is they will get a target that's low to the ground and they'll circle it, but the target can go in a tighter circle, like some egrets and stuff, and they'll go low to the ground circle, and they keep doing that, and they drive it up higher and higher and higher and higher, and again until it's exhausted, and then they'll go in and grab it. They have adapted to urban skyscrapers, old abandoned casinos. There's a blogger that I follow who's a photographer and a very interesting fellow. He's invented stuff for birders as well that's being used about keeping track of nests. And they go up to the top of the casino. It's abandoned, and they go to Frank Sinatra's suite up top, and there's a nest there, and they go out and take care of it. They've also nested in bridges, which is somewhat problematic because lots of the young end up getting killed in their first few flights. But they're amazing birds. They're the fastest animal on the planet. That's our mystery bird for this week.
Well, beautiful photos, and thank you.
And next up is Kathy.
Okay, so every week we talk about birds that are getting ready to depart from where we are here in Central Florida. We know we have some visitors from all over, which is so exciting, and we're glad you're here. So this is a breeder here. Actually, all of us in the East, the Parulas breed here. Now, I looked in all about birds, and it's like the pileated. You can pronounce it 3 different ways. So Parula, Parula, and I forgot the other way. But it's a tiny little wood warbler with a really short tail. They have this little yellow greenish patch on their back, and they have white eye crescents, and they usually are jumping around a lot, and they're one of the birds that gives you warbler neck because they're usually way up in the canopy. They're feeding on the insects and the caterpillars, and you can see the picture on the right. That one is a big juicy one. I remember watching that warbler, and it took him a while to devour that. That was a really good snack for it. And they have a distinct rising buzzy trill. That's how I usually spot them in the spring, is you hear that like, oh, the Parula's back, and get all excited. They love moss. They'll nest in the moss. So one way to attract them to where you live, if you live in the East, is if you live in the South and there's Spanish moss around and you find some on the ground, you can drape some on your trees and let it take off there, and you'll get some Parulas. They also do love water. And I know 2 different years in the winter, I've had 2 overwinter. And there's my bird bath, and that was about 2 weeks ago. And there was 2 of them just having a nice little bath, and it was so nice to see. And a little fun fact is, in the western part of the range, their song is longer and less buzzy. So, and those of you that live in South Florida, they do winter there, the very tip of South Florida. And then they also winter in the Caribbean and the eastern part of Central America. So hope all of you seen one, and they're going to be leaving soon, but then we get some other ones coming in. And now I'm going to hand it off to Sam with a new arrival that we're all excited about.
Oh, I'm sorry. Here was the distribution.
Oh, yeah. So here's the distribution. As you can see, we're very fortunate in the eastern part of the U.S. And then you can see the little tip of South Florida in the Keys where they will winter. But, you know, here in Central Florida, we get, if they find it really good, I guess some of them hang out. So now over to Sam.
Hey, everybody. So for new arrivals this week, we chose the belted kingfisher. Always a very exciting bird to see. Even more exciting to photograph, as they are very camera shy and you'll chase them all over the place. You'll definitely hear them before you see them, and they've got a great call. I'm going to play this and see if it works.
It worked.
Great. And the interesting thing about that for down here, because obviously they just winter here, they do not breed in our area, but most of the time you hear those calls, they're very, very territorial birds, whether it's another kingfisher. I've seen them go after egrets and even bigger birds. I've seen one I thought went after an eagle that went by. Like they seem to be kind of little tiny bullies in the neighborhood. And like I said, you'll hear them this morning. A few of us were out at Mead Gardens, and right as we got out of the car, we heard a couple, and I never saw it. And I was there for 3.5 hours. Never saw the bird, but heard it all morning. So they move around a lot, but do make a lot of noise and a really cool chatter. So both the male and the female, as you can see in these pictures, are mostly this slate grayish blue with white, and the female, which is on the left, has that buffy belly band. And the juveniles have that as well, but it goes away in the male, obviously, once it gets older. We see them here late summer through spring as they travel south. And if you look, depending on what you read, it says a lot of them, we still get some that stay here. Super rare to see. I think I saw my first one during June. And then didn't see another one until 2 weeks ago. So I think it was a fluke for that early bird I saw in June, but we should see them through late spring all the way through the winter, and we'll get decent numbers of them. Again, they don't breed here, which also, to the next point, interestingly, they will nest in banks of a creek, of a river, of a lake. They don't do that here, obviously, because they're not breeding, but they dig these holes with those giant beaks and tiny feet, and they're anywhere from 3 to 6 feet deep, and they usually angle them up so that they don't get flooded. So it's actually kind of a cool thing. And the other thing I didn't realize is these birds also cough up pellets. So their main diet. They'll go, but interestingly, the way they study what they eat is they go through what their pellets are and dissect them, because they usually nest very close to where they feed, and a lot of times they'll use the same perch. So it's a pretty cool, it's an interesting little bird. And they've been known, there's a record of them eating berries, which is kind of strange, but everything from salamanders, but mostly fish. And they don't spear their fish, but you'll see them hovering a lot, which is a really cool thing to see. And they slam into the water, but they're grabbing the fish rather than stabbing the fish. And I don't know, a lot of you guys on here are birders, but a really cool thing posted a couple years ago, there was a guy named Alan McFadden. He is a Scottish guy, and for 6 years he went to the same nesting spot to try to get the quote unquote perfect kingfisher shot, which it kind of is. And when we're off of this, if you want, it's a really cool story, but you can Google him. His name is Alan McFadden. It's McFadyen. So, but that's it. That's our new arrival, and they're fun to watch. So keep an eye out for them. And again, you can see their map here. And for us, it says that they're here year round, but I think we're right on the cusp of that. So, but they'll go all the way to the northern tip of South America, and they've been found as far south as Ecuador, and they'll breed all the way up into Alaska. So they're a cool bird. Check them out.
Okay, thank you so much. All right, I'm going to stop the share, and I am going to ask Gina to share. We're already up to Gina's program. And just by way of introduction of Gina while she's doing it, she works for the Avian Research and Conservation Institute in Gainesville, which she's worked, I believe it's 18 years. Am I correct, Gina?
All right, I'm off mute. 20, coming on 21 this spring.
Oh, okay.
I know. Since 2000, so it's easy to calculate.
Well, thank you so much for coming, and we're looking forward to hearing it.
Great. Oh, I'm so excited. This is a great idea. And I am very lucky to follow Sam Mitchum's presentation already for Bird Chat, which was a month ago or so. And so, you know, Deborah asked me, do a 20-minute talk on swallowtail kites and short-tail hawks. Like, wow, that's so much information. But please do look at Orange Audubon's former presentation on swallowtail kites. That will give you a lot of background on the bird's natural history. Fantastic. Okay.
Gina,
So-
because we went through pretty quickly, you have more time. You can go till 8 o'clock if you like.
All right. Okay. All right, good. So I am going to just make a few Zoom announcements. If we're getting spotty and choppy, I would recommend turning off your video if you're experiencing that. And also any other programs you're running off of your Wi-Fi that might be taking up bandwidth, that will help us just make sure the presentation goes smoother. I'm in a hotel right now and the internet's a little wacky, so I'm hoping it will stay with us for this. Okay, so without further ado, I work for ARCI, which Deborah mentioned, and we're based out of Gainesville, and we do research on birds throughout the southeastern United States. And a lot of those birds are migratory, so we follow them throughout the Caribbean and into Central and South America with the swallowtail kites. And I've listed our website here and also our blog, and we are also on Facebook. And right now, as the swallowtail kites are migrating, we're keeping up with their stories as they head south for the winter, and I will show you more on that. So I will start talking about swallowtail kites and give an update on our migration of the radio tag birds we're following now. And then I'll get into more of the natural history with short-tailed hawks, and then ARCI's research on them since the late 90s. So why do we study swallowtail kites? They are, their population has decreased since the 1940s. They used to nest in areas of 21 different states, all the way up the Mississippi Valley. And since the 40s, when there was a lot of logging and some human persecution and egg collecting and all these factors, shrunk their nesting range to the current map, which is parts of Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, Florida, South Carolina, and now just into the southern part of North Carolina. So their numbers are doing okay, but they still have not recolonized their former range. And like many species, they're habitat dependent. You know, if we are removing their nesting and breeding and foraging areas, then they are, you know, forced to try to find habitable places in a more concentrated area. So we've learned a lot about swallowtail kites through the use of telemetry. This adult swallowtail kite is sporting a satellite transmitter, and these are solar powered, and they last for 2, 3, and up to 7 years. We've had birds carrying these and giving us data, very accurate GPS locations that we can then use to find out all about their lives, where they're nesting, where they're roosting, how far they're foraging, any concentrated areas of prey sources, and then any constriction points along their whole migratory path. And we can look for, you know, areas where birds might be dying, whether it's, you know, in specific pinch points of their migration or in South America where they winter. And so this is an invaluable tool that we've been using throughout many different studies of swallow-tailed kites. And one of the most important things we're working on now is identifying these communal roosts. This is and I have to thank the wonderful photographers that I'm using their beautiful pictures. This is by conservation photographer Max Stone. I suggest you look more onto his photography because it's fantastic, and we worked with him on a few projects. But so throughout Florida and throughout their range, swallow-tailed kites, unlike many raptors, join together in these big communal roosts, especially when they're preparing for migration. So these places are where they go to sleep, the roost site specifically, but then they're sharing information. They're sharing protection from any predators that might be around. And then in the days to come, they're finding areas to feed together. So a swallow-tailed kite, the majority of the diet is insects, anything they can grab on the wing. So quick grabs off the treetops or ephemeral insects in the air, like dragonflies and beetles and even wasps. And they need to gorge on these before they start their migration. So by finding these areas together, they help each other get those fat reserves quicker and safer because they're in these groups. So especially in Florida, there are, we know of 3 locations that have over 1,000 birds roosting in the same areas. And these are these roost congregations, we call them pre-migratory roosts, happen at the end of July, early August. And that's when the birds are done nesting. They've even, some of them have left their young, they're on their own, and they find these migratory, pre-migratory roost sites together. And of these places, so the radio tags that we've been using, satellite telemetry, and also cellular phone technology too, called GSM. And those are the transmitters we're using more recently. And these GPS points that we're getting from the birds are leading us to these roost sites and letting us find new ones. And we want to make sure that they are protected for these birds to have a safe place to get ready for migration each year. Because after they feed and bulk up on their insect diet, they are ready to make the plunge to South America. So they, you know, raptors do not want to cross water. And swallow-tailed kites pretty much have to when you're in Florida. We have had birds go up and around the Gulf of Mexico. It takes longer following along on land, but most of the birds in the Southeast really funnel through Florida. So we're getting birds from Georgia, South Carolina, Alabama, Mississippi, even Louisiana. We've had our colleague, Dr. Jennifer Coulson, who's tagged birds in Louisiana, and her data has shown some of her birds coming from there, coming through Florida. So Florida is so important for swallow-tailed kites, and especially these roost sites, to make sure they have those reserves to make it across the water. And just a little note here on what you're seeing. Each color is a different satellite tracked bird that, and this is just a quick little subsample from 1 year of tracking. So this was a few years ago, and each color, again, a different bird, and the southern terminus of these locations are their winter range. So you can see they end up in parts of Brazil mostly, but we've also had birds in Bolivia and Paraguay and Argentina. So right now we are tracking 11 birds, and this was the quick map of where they were on August 2nd. And let's see, an update of what they went through for this southbound migration. It was just a very interesting, wacky crossing of the Gulf. This, we haven't seen birds kind of have all these bizarre migration paths going south in a long time. So usually the southbound is fairly safe. They are, you know, leaving Florida in the start of hurricane season, which can be okay if they time the wind right, because these fronts are, you know, making favorable winds, leaving the tip of Florida. They can, you know, leave during those favorable winds. But if they get into the Gulf and those winds change, a swallow-tailed kite can't power through. It can't change course, you know, physically, because they just don't have the power to fight against that wind. So they are really creatures of the wind. So we saw a bird here, for example, leave Florida, the peninsular Florida, trying to get to the Yucatan Peninsula, almost, I mean, just kind of skirting Cuba. And then it was about 180 miles north of the Yucatan Peninsula, and a strong easterly wind just pushed it straight across the Gulf of Mexico. And rather than fighting and, you know, pressing against the wind, it just took that tailwind and went with it. And you see it did this kind of curly Q out in the Gulf of Mexico. And then the best winds, the points between here was, so this was the longest time we've ever tracked a bird over water. It was 5 days. This is, and before that, it was 3.5 days, basically, that we've had birds survive while going over water. So that makes me think that this bird was fat and healthy and, you know, just had the reserves to make it across. So when it left, it had, you know, obviously a tailwind that encouraged it to leave. But once it got towards the end of Cuba, it just, instead of fighting it, the amount of points that were in this stretch here, this was like a 3 or 4 day stretch. And then the section that it took all the way to Texas was within 5 or 6 hours. So it was much faster. And the bird's good, it survived, and it just continued overland the rest of the way. So our star of Seminole and Orange County here is our friend Apopka, which you may or may not know of. This was a bird that came into rehabilitation because it was injured, first at the Maitland Bird of Prey Center, and then got flight ready at the Avian Reconditioning Center in Apopka. So at that point, they connected with us, and we were able to gather a bunch of support to purchase a transmitter to follow this bird. This is the first time, you know, we've had a rehabilitated bird do so well with a transmitter. So we were really excited to be able to follow this bird now since 2017. So we released it right before Hurricane Irma, essentially, like a month before. So he got strong, he got ready to go, and he took the winds right before this big, powerful hurricane came through, and he plowed through to Cuba, no problem. So he made it, obviously. We're still tracking him now. And this past summer, Sam Mitchum got some photographs of him in the Longwood area. He's been returning to this area now 3 years. Hasn't nested, but he is definitely hanging around and enjoying the insects and the food plethora of the Longwood area. Where is he now? He made it through all the way almost to his wintering territory, which is in Rondônia, Brazil. So he made a nice, clean exit through Florida to Cuba. And then he did this crazy, like, skip the Yucatan and Belize all together and come in Nicaragua. So, Honduras, sorry. And wasn't tired, didn't like, whoa, that was a big over water crossing. He just kept moving. So he cruised through. This was a fast migration over the Andes then, and then into South America. The rest of our birds, now you see the different colors here representing all of our friends here. This was a few days ago, I made this map. So you can see Apopka again before he made his cross down to Rondônia, where we've got 2 other birds there now too. So all these paths through and across the Gulf of Mexico. This is like wacky. This is, the winds were very odd for southbound migration this year. So more on this, you can go see our blog and follow through Facebook. I usually make an announcement on the Facebook page to check out our blog if we have new information on our migrating kites. So we hope you check that out. And to learn more about swallow-tailed kites specifically in Florida and their nesting perils, and some of our research and a great photography by Max Stone again, I suggest checking out this dual article we did with Biographic and also Audubon, National Audubon. So these are 2 online magazines that have the same article but different photographs in each. So I do suggest checking those out as well. All right, let's move to short-tailed hawks. This is a fabulous Florida bird, and it's actually what got me to Florida. I took a 2-month position to look for short-tailed hawk nests. 2 months, and I stayed 20 years. So this bird got me hooked. A little bit on the biology and how to tell a short-tailed hawk first, and then I'll go into more of ARCI's research. So short-tailed hawks are either a dark morph or a light morph. There's no intermediate. They breed together. It's not like more males are dark or light and females are either or. You can have a male or a female that's dark or light, and they will breed together and successfully raise chicks. So the adults can be identified, the dark morph, by that super chocolatey brown look. And then the white, creamy white, no belly band, like a red-tailed hawk on these birds too. I want to point out how kind of swept forward the wings are on short-tailed hawks. They have a very identifiable flight style. They kind of teeter, kind of waver in the kettle or the thermal that they would be rising in, with those wings kind of forward and also up. If you think of like a turkey vulture's profile, it's sticking up. It's called a dihedral. Their wings are higher than their body. Short-tailed hawks have a slight dihedral. And in one, I just think of them like it's like a bowl, like a very shallow bowl, looking at them from the top when you see their wings kind of splayed up and forward. And it's not that short-tailed hawks really have a short tail. I also want to point out that their secondaries, these long feathers, flight feathers that are closest to the body are long. And so it makes their wings wider. And that wide part of the wing is closer to the tail, so it makes the tail look short. But they really, anyways, I'm not going to change the name. I think they're a fabulous bird. They're secretive, you know. They hunt from the wing almost entirely. They fly very, very high, and they do this kind of kiting, not like a kestrel, which you'd see like flap its wing and stay in one spot, but they find the wind angle and they're still, and they'll hang there while they're looking at prey below. And they eat mostly birds, which is very exciting. And so they're hunting smaller birds. I have seen them also bring anoles and other lizards to their young at nest sites, but almost, I would say 85–90% of their diet is birds. And so when they're in this flight, they're hovering, and then they see the prey, and they'll do this like stair step, and at each step they pause again. And then they take this hard dive, stoop like a peregrine falcon out of the sky. But they start really high up in the sky when they're doing this. And often they're with vultures. So they're like hanging out and hiding, perhaps in a kettle of vultures. The unassuming songbird below is thinking, oh yeah, bunch of vultures up there, nothing to see here. And then they pop out of that in this stoop. So they're super stealthy like that. And they're hardly, they hardly vocalize, only around the nest site when they're defending a territory. And then, yeah, the mates will call to each other when they're bringing in food. So again, a dark morph, all chocolatey brown underneath, and these kind of forward swept wings, long primaries, and that head, I mean, man, they're just stunning as a dark bird. And this is pretty much the only all dark raptor that we would see in Florida. There are dark morph broadwing hawks, but they're very, very, very rare, if at all, recorded here in the eastern part, or in Florida. Light morphs, you can tell an adult from a juvenile. This is a juvenile bird because of this little area on the cheek. You see some light pattern here. An adult would have a very dark hooded look. So it almost looks like it has a helmet coming around those dark patches around the head. Here's an example. You can see the face pattern here. And this little like orangey area is not as evident. So don't take that as a notable field mark. But again, no belly band like a red-tailed hawk. Here's an adult dark morph hawk, and then the juveniles have various white speckling. So this one is heavily speckled as a juvenile bird, but some birds have more like pinstripes or even less of this kind of dappled light color. But that's how you can tell the juvenile short-tailed hawk dark morph, if it has like polka dots on the belly. And this is the back of that same bird, very, very plain. And these all these feathers look very fresh, you know, not too much wear, and the same kind of edging on the tail and also the wings. So it's a very fresh, similar molt looking raptor, but you'll rarely get this top view of a short-tailed hawk because they'll be above you. Just to put it in perspective, there's perhaps like 250 pairs of short-tailed hawks in Florida. This is the only state where they breed. They're also found in parts of Mexico, Central and South America, where they're more numerous. And some birds from Mexico have come into Arizona, New Mexico, and a few, very, very few nests have been noted there. But really, Florida is its own population of about 250 short-tailed hawks. And swallow-tailed kites, I'm going to go through these little banding codes, which you see here. Short-tailed hawks, very few. Swallow-tailed kites, probably this number's kind of old. It should be probably about 2,000 pair in the United States. Red cockaded woodpeckers, which is an endangered species. Also the Florida scrub jay, bald eagles, and wood storks. So these 4 birds at the end, red cockaded woodpeckers, scrub jays, bald eagles, wood storks, are endangered federally and on the Florida state list, but short-tailed hawks and swallow-tailed kites are not. So they are a species of concern because there are a very small, isolated population here, only found in Florida. And we say non-migratory, however, they do migrate within the state. So birds that nest throughout the peninsula and maybe up into the Big Bend area of the Panhandle do often migrate south for the winter to areas just south of Lake Okeechobee. So it could be Big Cypress and the Everglades and then into the Florida Keys. And of course, Florida is changing. We're seeing it right in our backyards. And places where short-tailed hawks nest are, areas that could be developable. They could be high and dry, where development would be easy, or some of these kind of swampy areas that could be drained and be affected by future development. So like every species of concern in Florida, development is imminent, and we just have to make sure there are areas for these species to inhabit and be able to nest. So ARCI has been doing research on short-tailed hawks since 1999. These projects include nesting success and productivity, monitoring the population, looking at migration and all the other things we can do with telemetry, like we have with swallow-tailed kites. And with this data, just trying to learn more about their conservation needs. So we had a big project banding short-tailed hawks on their wintering areas. So I had mentioned that many short-tailed hawks will migrate south in the winter, south into areas south of Lake Okeechobee. So we were in the Everglades and Florida Keys in kind of these migration corridors where the birds, many different raptors were coming through. And we had a state wildlife grant through Florida to capture and put VHF transmitters on birds on migration in the wintertime. And then we would follow, we would put telemetry gear on airplanes and then listen for those unique frequencies of each of the birds that we had transmitters on and find them all throughout their winter range periodically. And then the really neat thing was to follow them to nesting sites in the summer. So we were so excited when we would catch an adult female, because that was a very good chance that she would lead us to a nest. And here's an example of one of the places we were flying. Anyone want to take a guess where this might be? I know you're not going to talk, but it is in Citrus County, I think. Holy cow. It's the Chassahowitzka Wildlife Management Area. I think that's Citrus, if not Hernando County. Yeah, just to the north. So we were excited. Okay, we've got a beep, we've got a female, and there's a signal in the woods. So it's been fantastic watching the development of sighting reports and sharing of data through eBird and other birders and all these listservs and ways to get information on species throughout throughout Florida. Especially as a researcher. I mean, you guys are all out there putting in your eBird data, and it is helping other people find the birds where we're trying to study them. But what I'm making this point is, so birders see the birds where they are, where the humans are hanging out at that time. But how many humans are going to be in this forest and note that there is a short-tailed hawk nest? So this method had been perfect because we were able to understand the nesting needs of short-tailed hawks in an unbiased way. So here is that forest. There's a short-tailed hawk down there. And I had the pleasure of walking 2 miles in to the swamp and finding that nest. So you see it up there, that little circle. So this is actually an easy nest to see. Man, sometimes you look up and you might see a stick. So we have our telemetry gear. This is, you have to, we have an antenna and a receiver that we're physically tracking the beep to, and where it's the loudest when you're pointing that antenna is the direction of where that bird is. So sometimes we get in there and it's like, all right, it's loud straight up, but I can't see a thing. And they make a pretty big nest for, you know, you think of a red-shouldered hawk nest, it's that size, but they're small. They're smaller than a red-shouldered hawk. And they hide. It's like they're in the basement. It's like, how come we can't see you? So there's a lot of times where you're trying to find that little teeny tiny window to see where that short-tailed hawk is in there. Can you see a head? Is there chicks? And so we've taken a lot of time hanging out in the woods just patiently. Ooh, and Sam reminded me of the sounds, and I do want to play the sound of a short-tailed hawk. So if in the past, when I didn't have birds with transmitters and I was trying to find a nest, I would get into a forest where sighting reports from various birders, and this was before eBird and other listservs. So we were just getting, you know, some reports from notable bird sighters around the state. And I would get into the woods and early in the morning and listen for the sound of a short-tailed hawk calling. Do you hear that? It's super, super eerie. It raises the feathers on my back. I mean, or the hair on my arm. It's like that sound tells me there is a short-tailed hawk nest so close, and just got to be super patient. And you know, it take a long time to find a nest, but with those telemetry devices, we were able to really get an idea of these nesting birds and where they were. So we had a few projects at nests specifically. So when possible, we would climb to radio tag the chicks. So here I'm climbing up, and this pillowcase has a coffee can in it, which once I get there, I grab the little chick and put him safely in the coffee can, keep him horizontal, and put him in the pillowcase, and then I can lower him down safely to people on the ground that would then band it or put a radio transmitter on. We also did some camera work. You can see here a camouflaged camera that we put on a nest to monitor food delivery rates and to identify prey. Happy to say they were eating some cowbirds here at this nest. And I know in a lot of these urban areas, they're eating a lot of collared doves too. So these lovely little cuties up in the nest, very, very strong and very brave. They would tell me that they did not want me up there, which I don't blame them. You can see this little dot in their tummies. That is the crossing of the transmitter that we put on them. So these birds are big enough. Their bodies are essentially the size of an adult at this size. They're just featherless, right? So they are big enough to be able to fit that harness safely and still grow and have room to fill in. So there's a certain age where we can do that. So I just wanted to point out here that you can tell the color morph of a juvenile at this age. Want to take a guess? So these little orangey feathers, they start off with kind of a buffiness, but that will fade over time with the sunlight. So these are light morphs, both of them. That one, very different, right? These dark feather tracks, that's going to be a dark morph. Gonna be, it is already going to be an adult as a dark morph as well. And then this little guy, even smaller, some of these little fuzzies coming in, and that is also a light morph. And this is a beautiful nest side view of one of the chicks we were able to check out. More recently, we radio tagged an adult male that was called Dark Arrow from the Sawgrass Lake Park in Pinellas County. And this was with help from the St. Petersburg Audubon Society. And this male held his territory for 2 years in one spot. He did not migrate for the winter, stayed here through Hurricane Irma as well, hung on tight. It was quite interesting to see that. And he had some core foraging areas and would come back to roost in his territory. He stayed there all year. So that was really interesting to know, that a portion of the population is going to hang on to territories, especially a male. It would have been interesting to compare the female at the same time to see if she hung on there too. And more currently, we are developing our population monitoring survey. So we are getting an index of the population. This was also done with Florida Fish and Wildlife funds in, I think it was 2005 and 2006. We had 2 years where we were trying to develop this method of keeping track of the wintering population when they concentrate down in the Florida Keys and the Everglades. So what we did was we created driving routes where we would have places spread out a mile to 5 miles apart, where actually they weren't as close as a mile because we could see that far from visually if there was a short-tailed hawk. But we had like 5 or 6 routes that we could run in a morning and count all the birds from these places. So we would stop at certain points, those same points each year, and mark and get out of the car for 7 minutes, scan the sky, and count and mark all the short-tailed hawks that we saw. And often we could tell if it was male or female, or not, sorry, adult or juvenile, and then dark or light morph. So that was all really neat, especially when we could tell when we saw the juveniles, because we would know that there was a lot of successful nests that season. So that was done 2005 and 6. And now, just like citizen science wise, we are gathering volunteers to do these surveys to help us. So if you have time and are interested in heading to the Keys and Everglades, we would love to have you help us on these surveys. And they are from the last few weeks of October through November is the best time. And so we've been collecting this data for the last 3 years, and we hope to continue this just to keep an index of the number of birds that we're seeing along these routes. And with the study we did with Florida Fish and Wildlife, we compared this method to boat surveys throughout the Everglades, as well as helicopter surveys, and cost effectiveness and reliability of sightings and how many birds we were able to count. The easiest one, of course, was road surveys, and so it's something very simple to be able to keep up with. So I think that's it for now, and I'm happy to take any questions. Sorry if I chatted. Oof, we're almost at the end here. So please email me if we don't get to your question tonight. My email's here, and it's been a pleasure. Thanks for letting me share all this cool stuff about these 2 awesome birds.
Oh, this has been
Thank you.
fantastic. Thank you, Gina.
Yeah, thank you. Hey, Gina, we did have 2 questions in the chat box.
Okay.
One of them was, do you have any pairs that are both tagged as far as with the swallow-tailed kites? Do you have any mated pairs that are both tagged?
Yeah, we have in the past, not presently. But the interesting thing is they do not stay together with their, even going to pre-migratory roosts, and they've had different wintering areas and migration routes. So they get back to the nesting territory at different times. And we say, they'll stay together if it's convenient the next year. So if they both return in a suitable amount of time to that nest territory, they will breed again together. But if one is late, they may not, they might get antsy and find someone else.
And I think there was one other question. Someone that has been following your site, and they were just asking if JAGA 3 has been, if the transmitter has come back on, or if he's...
No. Yeah, this is a bird that crossed the Gulf of Mexico, very similar path to the one I shared, and we have not heard from that bird, so kind of very sad.
All right. And that was the only ones that I had in the chat box. Great presentation. Oh, wait, hold on. I'm sorry. One more. How far do the short-tailed hawks roam?
Ooh, good question. So from a nest area, I don't know that offhand, but I would guess it's probably 5 to 10 miles. Where their foraging area would be. I would say within 5 miles would be a core foraging area, but perhaps there's a honey hole of birds where an adult is finding great luck. They'll return to that if it's far enough away, and just know they can get back and forth from there. So,
Gina, when they go to Hundonia, there's also kites down there.
yes. So that's in Brazil. There's a southern subspecies, the Yatapa subspecies, that are nesting at this time of year. So, swallow-tailed kites are getting down there in the austral spring, and the southern subspecies is getting ready to nest while our kites are down there. So it's a
don't really interact much.
mosh pit of kites.
And Terrence asked, is there any accidental sightings of the short-tailed hawks due to the hurricanes? Have any become displaced?
So the only bird that we tracked through a hurricane was that bird that stayed in St. Petersburg. Gosh, I haven't heard. I would have to, not any of our tagged birds. So it would have to be sightings of short-tailed hawks in odd places. But they, when there's crazy winds and stuff, they would hunker down. They would perch and hold on to a tree or a branch for their life. So unlike you know, a seabird or magnificent frigate birds that we've had tracked that just get blown into Georgia or whatever that we've seen with hurricane winds. They just, why stop? Just let the wind, they're so efficient at flying that they just go. So yeah, I don't know.
And then someone asked why the two aren't on the endangered list if the numbers are so low.
Yeah. Swallow-tailed kites, you know, they're doing well, and a lot of their nesting locations are within timber company properties, and we've been successfully working with these landowners to just make sure there's habitat for them to nest. You know, a lot of forestry practices can be very compatible with what swallow-tailed kites need for food and nesting areas. So as long as there's some big trees for them, they'll do okay. And so there's kind of like a cooperative agreement, like there's not enough evidence for them to be listed or, you know, go through that process because they are doing quite well. And because we have such good cooperation with people that can make differences, you know, do good for the nesting birds, that there's really not the need to list swallow-tailed kites. And the argument for short-tailed hawks is interesting. They are, so you know, they're located in Florida, but the stronghold of the population is doing really good in Central and South America, where they're not having any population issues. So more needs to be learned about short-tailed hawks. They're kind of like the unknown stepchild of the raptors of Florida. I think there's still a lot to figure out. I think one of the main things that would help us figure out if short-tails are, you know, in more trouble is to do a genetics test. Like, how different are the peninsular Florida birds different than the whole rest of the population in Mexico to South America? So if any genetics students are out there, let's do a project. We'll catch short-tails and get some blood samples all over the world, or all over South and Central America. We've got a method, we can do it.
Gina, your mention of genetics reminds me that you didn't know that Apopka was not a female for a long time. So can you comment on that?
Yeah, for both short-tails and swallow-tails, you know, by looking at them, you can't tell. In general, raptors, with raptors, the females are larger, but not noticeable. Like, even when I have them in the hand and I get a weight from them, like I could say, ooh, this is a heavy bird, I bet it's a female. But there's so much overlap that I can't just say for sure. So we take a feather sample and or a little bit of blood sample, and there's a great genetics lab that with those samples they can tell us then if they're males or females. There's behavioral differences that you would notice watching a nesting territory, a nesting pair, that would say, oh, that's the male, that's the female. But otherwise, you need a sample.
Okay. Well, we had a lot of people on and we all had a great time. We really enjoyed this.
Yay. Me too. Oh, I have your next, yeah, so that we did that.
Okay. Yes, if we're going on doing these bird chats every Thursday night, except the third Thursday, which is our normal Audubon program. So you can submit photos and questions to info@orangeaudubonfl.org. And then the last one. Thank you very much for joining us, everybody.
Yeah, it's great. Good to see and see
Thank
all sorts of familiar faces and names.
Thank you,
That's
Gina.
great.
It was awesome.
You're
Thank you so much.
welcome.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Sure, sure.
We'll see y'all next week.
We're leaving now. 55.
All right.
Thank you.
Bye now.
Bye.